And Dairy Queen has a commercial now that says, because good isn't good enough. But you know what we do? This is what we do. Well, devil, I gave you $50. That's good. Well, devil, I went to church one time last month. That's good. Well, devil, I prayed today over my food. That's good. Well, devil, I told people that you blessed me. That's good. Why is good enough for God? But good isn't good enough for us. Why is good not good enough for me to get my wife a present, or my son a present, or my daughter a present? Why is good not good enough for me to buy myself something or to do something for myself? Why is good not good enough when it comes to an ice cream sundae? But good is fine and dandy for God. Good is okay for God. We just do a little bit for God, and that's good. That's good. Why is this woman's story told? Because she understood that good wasn't good enough. She gave her very best. She found the most valuable thing that she had, and she said, devil, this is for you. This is for you, not for me. For you. Church, I have to tell you something. Tonight isn't going to be so much of a sermon as it's going to be a teaching. The apostle said this. I beseech you, therefore, brethren, Romans 12:1. I beseech you, therefore, brethren, I beg you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable unto God, which is your reasonable service. Now, let me see if I can break that down a little bit, Romanes. Who give today? Mogapral. And andai devleski mila pushaftu. Kar te el ikyo stato. Sa sacrifice. I'm not down. Sa te el kako sacrifice. Holy. Sweet. Acceptable unto God, which is your reasonable service. Do you know what reasonable service means? Reasonable service means the least that you can do. The very little bit that you can do. If I walk in the house and I tell my wife I'm hungry, and she goes and fixes me a bologna sandwich, that's the very least that she can do. But God is saying, present your bodies as a living sacrifice. Now, if we follow this woman's example, and we do what we're supposed to do, which is the very least that we can do, when we know that when it says the word sacrifice, you see, back then they had, in their faith, they had to do something once a year. They had to sacrifice a baklava. And when he says, present your bodies as a living sacrifice, the Jews who read this understand what he means. Because they would take that baklava and they would inspect him. You see, you couldn't just take any baklava to God. You couldn't just walk outside, because back then everybody was, not everybody, but most people were Falmaria, and they had baklava, and they had gurumnya, and you couldn't just go out and say, oh, godo sapuro kamero pemande, asti davis kadeo. You couldn't do that. No. You couldn't say, oh, godo sanaswaloho. Oh, asti davus kaldel. You couldn't do that. You couldn't say, oh, godos sa slaboho, asti davus kaldel. Godos sa bango, godos sa kuho. Silas kowaris, chipla chalmales wool. Let me give him to God. That wasn't allowed. You see, let me tell you what was allowed. Let me tell you what they would do. They would bring this little baklava in. Now, I know Easter was last Sunday, but this is, Helen reminded me, today is the Romano Easter. Okay? Or the Orthodox Easter. Okay? So we're going to talk a little bit about what happened at Passover time, when they would make the sacrifice. They would take a lamb, and they would look at his outside, and they would make sure that all his wool was white. You see, his wool couldn't have spots in it. It couldn't have another color in it. It all had to be white. And then they would shave him, and they would look at his morki. And he couldn't have a pimple. He couldn't have a spot. He all had to be pink underneath that wool. They had to make sure he was a good color all the way through. Then they would look in his eyes. They would make sure his eyes were clear. And he didn't have cataracts. And he wasn't going blind. And he didn't have any problems. Pastor, what do you mean, present my body a living sacrifice? Remember this all. The Old Testament was 90% physical. Physical things happened. In the New Testament, it's 90% spiritual. There's types and shadows of what the Old Testament was, that they did physical things that apply in the Spirit. And the scripture says, I will set no evil thing before my eyes. You want to know how you present your body a living sacrifice? They would look in that little lamb's eyes and they would make sure that his eyes were good. Well, I want to do that, Pastor. I want to present myself a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable unto God. Hold on, I have to let you know something real quick. You know what would happen if they would take a whole little lamb and take him in and sacrifice him for God? You know what would happen? God would kill the high priest. When he went into the Holy of Holies to pour out the blood, God would kill him. The high priest had to have a rope tied around his leg, and he had little bells on the bottom of his skirt. And so when he would walk, they could hear the bells. And when they wouldn't hear the bells anymore, they'd know he was dead. And they wasn't allowed to go in. So that rope, they would pull him out. You see, if the lamb wasn't perfect. Now, what did the apostle tell us to do? Present your bodies a living sacrifice. Well, now let's take the physical lesson that we were taught and let's apply it spiritually. I will set no evil thing before my eyes. Make sure your eyes are clear. What have we been looking at? Are we looking at stuff we shouldn't look at? Are we seeing things we shouldn't see? Are we paying attention to things we shouldn't pay attention to? What are we setting before our eyes? Present your body.